You need to understand the job in detail and really need to understand whether you're made for it. Most of the myths are around HR. I've never heard a topic around myths in sales function or myths in marketing. The myths are always around HR. You can work as a HR business partner. You can work as a business partner in sales, in plant, manufacturing setup, in corporate. You can do specialized roles in training. You can work in recruitment. You can work in organization development. HR is not such an easy function where anybody who enters will grow to a certain level. You have to really perform well.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Mentoria Career Tube channel. Today we'll be doing a unique and exciting webinar for every person trying to get into the HR world or building a career in HR. We're going to be answering a lot of interesting questions that some of you sent across on building a career in HR as well as the myths of a career in HR. We have with us Atulaya Goswami. He's an HR leader. He's the head of HR of the India sub-region of UPL Limited. He spent over 15 years in HR in various organizations from Motocorp to Proctor Gamble to China Fortune Land Development to UPL. He's a phenomenal speaker and very passionate about mentoring students who want to build a career in HR, which is why he's also started his own YouTube channel called HR Shorts with Atulaya. The link to the channel will be available at the end of this webinar. Not to take too much time from the man himself, Atulaya, it'll be wonderful if you can introduce yourself and tell us and our audience a little bit about how did you decide to get into the career of an HR professional?
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to engage with the audience through this platform today. And thanks for the wonderful introduction that you've already done. So I basically have spent almost about 15 years in this field of HR now. I've spent my time in different organizations. So starting from, working for Motocorp, where I started my career in a very unconventional way. That's where I picked up a lot of learnings in HR because I did various assignments, in different areas of HR. Startup assignment also for a small time, in one of the companies and then moved into UPL. So currently I lead HR for India region for UPL. HR was, honestly speaking, to your first question, not a natural choice for me. I think when I did my graduation, I think at that point in time, I think one of the things which, like a lot of students, I think what I was looking at was MBA as a career. So management as a career. Because a lot of times, we as young students, we have we have a very limited viewpoint on what all career options are there, and a lot of times we go with what is available in front of you, what is there as a buzzword, what is there in the news, what are those areas where you want to typically make a career. So I think in those days management or MBA was something which was catching up big time. So HR was not a natural choice. I think MBA or management was a natural choice at that point in time. Interestingly, the college where I passed out from, which was Symbiosis Center for Management and Human Resource Development, they actually, required the students to choose the specialization even before applying. So, and you didn't really have the choice of choosing it later on. So HR was something which, I went on with and took it as one of the options. And the interesting part here was I always believed, I think this is where a lot of gut feel also went into it, that I always believed that, I have the ability to work with people at the same time, work and build very close relations with people. I think those were some of the softer aspects. And I think for me, it was more about the MBA, more about the management degree at that point in time. And that's how I went into this profession, and that's history. And then after that, went into it, learned it. So for me, it was a very, very unplanned, not a by design career choice, if I may put it that way.
So fate got you in the HR fraternity.
To a large extent.
Wonderful. Well, that brings up a very, very interesting question, Atulaya, because you had to choose your specialization even before finding out what HR is all about or what marketing is all about. So there's, not out of choice, but maybe out of compulsion that you had to choose something before you got into the college. And most students have very different, very unique methods of deciding whether to do an HR specialization or a marketing specialization in their BBA, MBA or BMS courses. So how do you recommend a student makes his decision, right? When they are given the choice between operations and international business and HR and so on and so forth, what are the parameters that you think one should consider before deciding, which particular specialization to get into?
Yeah, I think the times have certainly changed, and now the good news is, in those days, if I go back to, when I was thinking about these options, we never had LinkedIn, or we never had those kind of forums where we could actually engage with the industry experts. So those forums were just not there, and I think the amount of information available was also quite limited at that point in time. So I give you a very simple example, and then I will come to the question that has been asked. Almost about a week back, there was a student who just got into XLRI who got in touch with me, and she was trying to understand certain things about HR as a career. And just imagine, if I just go back to my days, I never really had those opportunities of engaging at that point in time for a career choice or for a specialization choice for myself. So I think knowing your own personality, I think that is something which you really need to do. There are a lot of ways to do it. There are career anchor assessments that happen. There are psychometric assessments that happen. There are strength finder tools which are there in the market. So there are a lot of things that you can do first to know yourself. I think that is the starting point. You got to know about yourself. Assuming that, if you're doing a BBA or you're in the MBA year one, I think you got to know the subjects really well. And that is where your whole effort of understanding the concept theoretically, understanding the subject theoretically will matter a lot. I think the second part of it, which is very, very critical these days, is how much are you engaging in the external world through the LinkedIn platform, through LinkedIn, through different forums where you have experts actually, and you have different forums where you can actually engage and understand where the market is actually heading. So, be predictive about things. That's also one element. I go to the point of saying, why only HR or marketing? You may even go down to the extent of, drilling down on what inside HR or what inside marketing. Maybe digital marketing is your cup of tea, or maybe learning and development is your cup of tea, or maybe recruitment is your cup of tea. So you really need to understand where you're actually getting into. I think today we have a lot of information available, and of course, there are people who are sharing information. I happen to be one of them. I humbly, do share, connect with a lot of students through my platform where I share about careers. I think those are some of the important elements which, people need to keep in mind when they have to choose a specialization.
Right. So that sounds like a relatively rational approach, right? To see and discover yourself and understand yourself and then make a decision. But however, I've seen that a lot of students can't follow that rational approach. Very often it's a very superficial or surface or checklist level approach that most people follow whilst choosing their MBA specialization. I've seen a lot of students say, okay, so marketing is more glamorous, it has more power, so I want to get into that. Or, a career in HR would just be, if I don't get into marketing, then I'll look at HR as a career. Or that's generally the surface level decision making that happens across students. I mean, from a very realistic perspective, how would you want students to be choosing their careers? Because both careers to some extent have to do with dealing with people. HR is about selling internally, marketing is about selling externally. And so sometimes it gets very confusing for people to decide kya karna kya.
So I think the first point here is, it again goes back to the previous one. So just quickly recapping. So know yourself. I think know your own aspirations. And I always say that, this may sound a bit philosophical, but when I look back, now when I go back to 15 years of my career, I think this is something that has personally helped me. And there's nothing called conventional or unconventional. When I started my career, I took on a plant HR role. I started my career in a very unconventional way. And in those days also, a lot of people told me, why a career in HR or why a career in plant HR? A lot of HR people don't start their career in plant HR. It's not really seen as a very glamorous job, right? The glamorous HR jobs, a lot of people would say, are in the corporate offices. You have to follow what you believe in, what you are excited about. And again, it goes back to the point that you should know what you're getting into. You will understand what they actually stand for. So sales, a lot of people will say, yes, it's a wonderful career. It's the engine of the company. The money comes from sales. And if it is a glamorous area, why not? I mean, that's where the money comes from. Company, any CEO or promoter would invest money to, get the highest sales. HR in sales, the tougher the job, the higher the returns. And if you don't perform, the implications are also that big, right? So you need to understand the job in detail and really need to understand whether you're made for it. So if you are somebody who likes, is very strong in communication, who believes in very objective, number-driven scenarios, is very, very aggressive, sales is a career for you. If you're high on emotional intelligence, if you are somebody who believes that, you want to develop people, or it is something, you want to live in a certain, certainly in a different world where you want to develop people through a certain mechanism or a process, HR is the career for you. So I think knowing those nuances are very important. People who understand HR would appreciate the fact that HR is not a function which is like a mainstream function, right? It's a function which is an enabling function. So that's the role of HR, and ultimately the function, the role which HR plays is to make sure that the business delivers its results, right? So that's how the role is. We need to do what we like and what we are made for. I think that's the best way to go about it.
So these are the couple of important things to keep in mind before choosing either or. We've actually run a survey across about 160 different HR professionals, HR students, different people in the industry to understand what do their friends say about their career, what do their families say about their career, what are the general perceptions that people have about this career.
Most of the myths are around HR. I've never heard a topic around myths in sales function or myths in marketing. The myths are always around HR. So HR is pretty interesting. I think a lot of people take interest in HR. So that's a good thing to have.
Absolutely. So let's start with myth number one. The first myth that came on top of the list of a lot of people that shared their thoughts with us was HR is often confused as administration. HR to admin ke log hote hain. Right? So that's the first myth that's come across. What would you say to anybody who's confusing or has this misconception of the HR world?
So again, HR is a fairly vast field, right? So HR will have a lot of elements, and we can have a coffee discussion for almost 1 hour where we can talk about each and every area of HR. And admin definitely, it happens to be one small subset of HR. And in a lot of cases, a lot of companies, these days admin is actually completely out of HR. So there is a separate department which actually, takes care of admin services, which would essentially be, your cafeteria or your transport services or office facilities and so on. So a very, very small subset. I think if we go back 20 years or maybe 10 years from now, a very small subset of HR, but a very, very important aspect. So just imagine if you don't get food, it's not a great situation to be in an office, right? So if you don't have transport facility in a factory, or if your bus gets late, your production efficiencies or your production for that day can get impacted. So these are very small services, small subsets of HR, but they are very, very important. So at the same time, we need to be mindful of that part as well.
So the second myth that we've come across in our survey is that there is no growth or path in an HR career. कि यार grow नहीं करोगे तो HR में जाओगे तो उसी में रह जाओगे. So what do you have to say to that, or to people thinking in that manner?
So assuming you do well and you are able to cover each and everything in HR, I think you can easily have a 40-year career in my mind, and you can work around different areas of HR. So just think about it. You can work as a HR business partner. You can work as a business partner in sales, in plant, manufacturing setup, in corporate. You can do specialized roles in training. You can work in recruitment. You can work in organization development. I think you said it all, right? Employee relations. HR is not such an easy function where anybody who enters will grow to a certain level. You have to really perform well, and you really have to acquire certain skill sets. So it's not something which is easy at all, and you definitely have a very strong career path. A lot of organizations have a very well-defined career model where they actually know that in year 1 I do this, in year 2 and 3 I do this, and this is typically how I grow in a career of being a HR professional. So HR clearly offers a long-term career. Eventually, I've also seen that, a lot of HR professionals, when they reach a certain level, they've moved into business functions also. So it's not that, you can only stay in HR. I have examples of people I've seen in my own personal experience where, people have moved into business at a later stage. And I've also seen examples of companies who actually do not promote somebody to a people leadership position at a very senior level till they have done a HR assignment. So that's the level of seriousness of the career path when it comes to HR. I do this session around skills of the future with a lot of campuses, where I've been engaging. One of the skill sets it talks about is organization development and change management that we need to build for the future. And just imagine the amount of changes that are going to happen in the job landscape in the coming days. so much of inorganic growth, right? Companies are going to be extremely impatient about the way they are going to grow, and digital will come into play. Who is going to anchor all these changes? I think you will need very, very strong OD, organization, change management, HR stroke, change management specialist to actually anchor the organization. Otherwise, things are just not going to be successful. And the role keeps evolving, right?
Fantastic. I think that's extremely helpful. Let's get to myth number 3. And I think we've covered this, but I still want to cover it because a lot of people I've spoken to about HR try and say something like this. यार HR में काम तो सब simple होता है. Work is extremely simple in the HR fraternity. सिर्फ hire और fire करते रहते हैं और कुछ HR करता नहीं है. Right, so I've seen that becomes a huge myth or perception that people have. So what would you say to anybody thinking in that manner?
Both have their own technicalities, right? So if you don't know the right way, you can actually end up not doing it properly, and that can have organization implications. So that actually talks about the technicality of HR. So HR is, of course, is a core specialization. You specialize in HR. That itself means that you have to learn HR. And there are different elements of HR. So let's talk about recruitment, right? Recruitment is a pretty objective process. It's not that, I meet somebody and I select somebody. There is a psychometric assessment involved, right? There is a test involved. There is an interviewing skill required. It's a skill, right? Interviewing is a skill. You select the people based on certain aspects which you need to measure from an employee relations point of view. If you don't separate the employee in the right way, if you're not following the laws of the land, if you're not making sure you have the right performance improvement plan in place, if you don't follow the right process, your company can actually end up in a court case at some point in time. So that there's a technicality involved in that as well. So I just want the viewers to be very mindful of when we talk about these things, there are technicalities involved. There are laws, there are employment laws involved. There's a completely technical element which goes into it. Think about compensation and benefits, right? Purely technical. How you decide the salaries of the employees. A lot of people will say, hey, HR gets a dream and this is how you decide how to pay, but there's a science behind it. There's very clear science behind it. You do a benchmarking exercise with the competition. There's a statistical analysis which goes into it. A lot of people will say, so there is you do employee engagement surveys, and there is a methodology behind it, right? It's almost like a market research. So you're doing a research around, or you're doing a survey around, how do I really make sure my organization is engaged? There is a theory behind it, right? Same is for L&D. Think about learning and development. There's a strategy. So you just don't decide, wake up as a HR and say, hey, tomorrow I will train my people on presentation skills. It doesn't work that way. What are my business objectives for that year? What are my business priorities? How do I link up the people strategy? What are the training needs which come out of that? Then you arrive at a certain outcome of saying that this is how I will do a L&D strategy for that matter, right? So pretty much manpower planning. Think about any element. It's all linked with the business. It's all linked with the business strategy. It's nothing to do with ease. I think it's a pretty complex game because you're dealing with people, right? Sales, you're dealing. I'm doing this comparison, but let me just do it for the viewers. That sales is objective, right? I have to sell this much. If I sell this much, I achieve my target. How do you say HR is doing well? A very difficult answer, because you can't satisfy each and everybody. Not everybody in the organization will be happy. So your job will always be, a bit ambiguous around how is it, what is it that I do so that I have a high performing organization in the company. And you're dealing with different people from different cultures, different backgrounds. Definitely not easy. If anybody who says this is easy, I would say, please come here and, take on the job. It's not that easy.
Bilkul. So to anybody thinking HR is a simple career, free invite from Atulaya to live a day in his life and see how extremely complicated HR is as a career and a profession. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Atulaya. The next sort of perception or myth that comes up is HR is a pressure-free job. Anybody can do it. It's only about fun at work and, just organizing some activities and so on and so forth. What would you say to anybody thinking about such a thing, that it's a pressure-free, fun at work, just a happy-go-lucky job?
I think no job that we do, whether you are self-employed or you are working as a HR professional or you are in business, I think a lot of people who are in the job market, they would say that business is pressure-free, right? Money comes on its own after a certain point. But I think it's not like that, right? Most of the professions or all the professions, they have their own pressure points. They have their own challenges. think about situations where the increments are going to go live. And I think that's a high pressure situation because, and especially if you have a COVID situation. So how do you really engage the organization? And think about those situations where industries are getting very badly impacted, where you have to have separations. Are you telling me that if I have to separate somebody, that's a low pressure job? Probably not. I mean, end of the day, HR folks are also humans, right? Think about a plant situation where you have a ER issue, where you have an employee relations issue, where you have a union, or you may not have a union, right? People are having some sort of discontent. Or even think about a situation where you're starting a new factory and you suddenly have a protest happening outside in the local village where they say that, hey, the land that you have acquired does not belong to you, by the way, right? It belongs to us. So how do you handle those kind of situations where you make sure that your employees are safe and nothing happens to them? Are these low pressure situations? I would say absolutely not. These are very, very high pressure situations. And every HR professional will have, I'm not saying every day is pressure, but you have your moments on and off, depending on the job you're doing, depending on which part of HR you are in, you will have pressure situations. And end of the day, everybody is there to perform. And when you're talking about performance, you want to be at your best. And obviously business expects a lot from HR. It's not that, business says that, you guys can do anything you want. It's a people strategy end of the day.
So it's obviously a very, very high pressure job. And like Atulaya said, there are so many times where you just won't have everybody that's happy and on the same page. It's sort of maintaining the balance between what the people want as well as what the business wants. And that's just not, a cakewalk. Perfect. Thanks a ton for sharing that.
Almost every HR professional is actually part of the business leadership team, which decides the strategy. So if you have a sales head, you have a overall business head, you will have a marketing head, and similarly you'll have a HR head, right? So end of the day, strong organizations, they know very well that ultimately it's not the robots who will get the job done for them. It is going to be the people on the ground who will do the job for them. And they will rely very, very strongly on the HR strategy. So if I am a business head and I know there are certain issues in my organization in terms of morale, or I'm having teamwork issues with other departments, and that is actually impacting my sales and productivity, they will rely very, very strongly on HR professionals. They will be very, very proactive. But at the same time, like I said earlier, it's very, very important for the HR professional to understand the business and create that presence for themselves in that business leadership meeting. Any organization that has to be successful has to have a very strong people strategy, and simple small things, right? Sales organization not having a strong recognition program or a strong sales incentive program can affect your performance on the ground.
Absolutely, and I think it's phenomenal that you're bringing this up, because I can only imagine from leadership hiring to ensuring that the top management has the right skill set, is engaged, to leadership development, right? Ensuring that everybody has the right skills in place, to hiring all the key people that are going to make the key business decisions, keeping them all aligned to the same organizational mission and vision and values, right? Ensuring that people are connected with the cause, ensuring that people are being fairly compensated, people are engaged, people are growing within the organization is probably the most important aspect in any organization and its growth, and that's what HR looks after. So it's completely untrue for anybody that's watching that HR is not a part of key business decisions, but I think it is the backbone of any organization and its growth, and thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to just talk about one last myth before we move on to the next segment of Atulaya, which is a lot of people tell us that HR are the first to get fired in bad circumstances or in dire times. What would you like to say about this myth that a lot of people have?
So it depends on, I think anybody can get fired. It purely depends on how well your business is doing in a certain situation. I think let's look at the current situation. I think that's the most recent one. And it's unfortunate, right? It's an unprecedented situation. And it has affected different industries in a different way. And depending on which industry you are part of, the implications would be high or low. And there's nothing called HR will be fired first, or somebody else would be fired first. Actually, most of the time what happens is, to answer this question a bit differently, when these kind of situations come in, companies look at jobs which are very, very manual and repetitive. So I think typically those are the jobs which get digitized or outsourced. So in those cases, the firing happens. I think it's not necessarily HR, it could be anything. And I don't want to name a certain function here because there's no such definition, right? Anybody can get fired depending on what situation you have in the external environment. Of course, if the company is not going to recruit and company is going to have a situation where they're going to lose a lot of people, HR can also get fired, right? It's not HR will be the first one to get fired. Anybody can get fired in an unprecedented situation.
If you're not a key contributor in your organization, if you're not performing well, if you're not delivering organizational goals, and if you don't have a high sense of ownership, where even in dire circumstances, you're not constantly going back to the organization and saying, what more can I do for you to help you win? Any person across any function can get fired, as you know, if this is what they're doing. So it doesn't matter whether they're HR or sales or anybody else.
Absolutely.
A quick summary in context of what I'm doing. Perfect. So this is the Mythbuster section of our entire webinar, and thank you so much for busting these myths that came across a lot. So a lot of people come across this, right? Whenever they're in a career in HR, whenever they're from their friends, from their family, from their colleagues, they come across these myths, and I think this is going to be very important for them to share to see, hey, this is what we're actually doing, and it's not really what your perception is. What would you say, Atulaya, are the key attitude, skills, and knowledge that you believe students moving towards the HR fraternity should look at acquiring? Because that's what we're seeing, right? Employability is far more important than theoretical knowledge. And a lot of people across a lot of institutions, a lot of MBA colleges graduate without having the right set of attitude, skills, and knowledge, because that's not really drilled in them as they are getting their education. So one, I want to know from you as a leader in the HR space, what are the key ASK that you look for a person getting into this career? And how do you think that students that are getting into the HR profession can acquire these attitude, skills, and knowledge besides their MBA education or besides their institutional and theoretical knowledge?
So I think the first starting point in HR starts with, from an attitude standpoint, I think you have to be very high on integrity. I think that is something which has to come naturally to you. You should not be somebody who likes to break rules. Of course, because the job is very much about conscious keeping. And a lot of times in your career, and from my personal experience, I can tell you that a lot of times you come across careers where you have to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea, as we call it, right? So you have to take calls which you will not want to take. And that's where, going back to when you said HR is an easy function, I would say, in my own career, being involved in situations where, a lot of times you have to tell the business to do the right thing, right? Quote unquote, do the right thing. And who will do the right thing is actually the conscious keeping is done by the HR function. So very, very high on integrity is something that you really need to have. I think the second piece that you really need to look at is problem solving. I think problem solving and critical thinking. I think this is important because you deal with people's situations. And when you deal with people's situations, people will come to you with a lot of complex problems. And those it could be anything related to a salary, it could be related to a culture, it could be related to a lot of non-tangibles, right? A lot of intangibles. And when you're dealing with that world of intangibles, a lot of times you need to be very, very strong in terms of critical thinking and complex problem solving. And you have to connect the dots. I think that is one skill set which you certainly require. The third piece I always talk about is emotional intelligence. And that is again in two pieces. So emotional intelligence is how much do you know yourself, self-awareness. And second piece is social intelligence. So are you able to, get into a group, understand the dynamics and, get the job done? Because that's a large portion of HR professionals, right? The fourth piece is leadership skills. And leadership again in two aspects. So personal leadership and people leadership, because personal leadership would be how you manage yourself. How do you develop yourself in, once you take on a certain job, how do you complete that job? And the second piece is about how do you manage the people who you are going to lead in the future, right? So are you the person who knows when to be on the dance floor and when to be on the balcony? I always give this analogy, right? So in a desk, you have a balcony and a dance floor. So you should know when you should be on the balcony and empower the people. You should be on the dance floor to solve the problem with the people if required, right? So those are certain skill sets or certain attitudes. And there are ways and means to do that. There are different, courses that you can get. There are different coaches available these days. You have emotional intelligence coaches also. So most of these things that I just talked about, you have to theoretically understand what this is. And then you have to practically start implementing, challenge yourself to, take on those positions. If you are a B school grad, nobody stops you from taking on positions of responsibility and accountability. A lot of us are not leaders by design, right? We have to force ourselves. A lot of us are backbenchers. We are not front benchers. Growth mindset. So how much are you willing to learn new things? I think that is again very, very important, because HR is a very vast domain, and it shoots out into so many other things if you just get into that area. And you really need to have a mindset where you're open to learn new things and you're able to expose yourself. And last but not the least, in HR, you will spend a lot of time communicating with people. So your communication and interpersonal skills, these are going to be very, very, very important. And you should be somebody who is able to understand things, has good listening skills, at the same time is able to communicate the things in the right way so that people get inspired and people also understand that. I think, and the good news, most of these skill sets you get a chance to build in your B school. So if you're taking up a career in HR, most of the areas that I just talked about, you will get exposed, and you will get exposed to it, and it's up to you on how much do you want to learn about it.
I'm going to move on to the last question that we have today. So when looking for your first HR job, as soon as somebody finishes their MBA or finishes their B school and is looking for their first HR job, what kind of experiences do you think students should focus on? Because very often I've seen that there's the mindset of a lot of students has shifted from learning being the primary factor to money being the primary factor when they're choosing a job. So should money be the primary factor, or should it be something else? And should they limit themselves to college placements or seek out opportunities elsewhere as well?
So I think the first point is, if you're clear about the fact that this is an area within HR and you know it enough to take a judgment around it, and you've talked to the experts, or you know the people in the industry, and you've got the right inputs from your profs, or the professors or the faculty in the courses that you're pursuing, you need to decide basis that. So a lot of people are very clear from day one that I want to become a learning and development professional. Or some people are very clear that, hey, I want to make a long-term career in recruitment or headhunting. This is what excites me, right? I like that kind of a job. So I will take up those kind of jobs. But in cases where you're not clear about it, which is true for a large portion of people who specialize in HR, where they don't know, or where they are not so clear about it, start with a HR generalist or a HR BP role. I think that is your safest bet, because in that, either you work in a factory, or you work in a corporate office, or you work for a sales organization or a marketing organization, you are pretty much handling everything, right? So you get exposed to a bit of recruitment, you get exposed to learning and development, you do culture surveys, organization development, compensation, mix of performance management, and so on, right? So you do most of the things which you would do, but you do it but you are a jack of all trades and a master of some of them by the time you complete 2 or 3 years. And that gives a good exposure of what are those areas which I like, right? So when you're doing 7-8 things, you by design or naturally over a period of time develop a choice that, hey, compensation is something that excites me. And then you take on that stream, for long term in your career. So my advice would be, start with the HR generalist role.
So the second question was, should money be the primary factor when we're looking at choosing a job, or should it be something else?
So I think getting the right company should be the first choice. I think money will follow. Getting the right company. Just my simple question to anybody who says this, from my experience, give me the highest paid job, but give me the worst boss on the planet. Will I continue in that job? Or give me a bad culture in a company and give me a great pay. It's very difficult for me to continue beyond a point. I think there are surveys or studies out there, which talk about what are those top 3 things which actually make you stay in a job. And it starts with meaningful work. Point number 1, meaningful work. Let's remember that. So that is point number 1. So you need to choose what you like, and you need to really love what you're going to do. Second piece is look for the right company. I think the world today is pretty much open. There are leaders out there, companies who stand out for a certain purpose. They have a mission. They call it out very, very clearly. I mean, you can go to LinkedIn, their website, you can see that. And by the way, there is something interesting called Glassdoor, which talks about companies, and it talks about the inside culture. So do your bit of understanding where you're getting into. right? So the companies are important. And if you're able to get these two things right, I think money will automatically follow. I always say money is a byproduct, right? If you're getting into the right company, something which you like, follow your passion ruthlessly and unconventionally, a lot of times I think money will follow.
Perfect. Fabulous. And the last segment of this question was, should students primarily only look at their own college placement cells and placecom cells and limit themselves to those opportunities? Or should they go out, like you said, ruthlessly look for opportunities that they're passionate about? Because I've seen very often that people restrict themselves, कि यार जो placecom ला रहा है, जो college में placements हो रहे हैं, let's just stick to that and not really look for anything else. So what's your take here?
I think gone are those days where we were so not so well connected. I think today the platform is pretty open, and there is a small advice also there. So when you reach out to experts or when you reach out to HR professionals or senior leaders, don't introduce yourself by saying that, hey, can I get a live project, or can I get a can you help me get a job? I think that's a big put off, right? That's a big turn off. So don't do that. I think try to build relations outside. And there are two sides to your MBA or your courses that you're doing. So one is the inner learning in the courses. The second is being predictive about the market and building connections. Building connections is going to be very, very critical for you. And do that in a matured way. Do that over a period of time. Jobs will follow. And I've personally seen examples of students who got placed just through connections, because you share your thoughts, you share your perspectives. And I always talk about personal branding on LinkedIn. I think you should exhibit that, and leaders watch that, and HR professionals watch that very, very closely. And you just don't know where you hit home because of that. And because it's a matter of knowing the right people. So let's say you are somebody who likes a startup kind of an environment, and your campus doesn't invite startups. The platform doesn't stop you. It doesn't stop you from reaching out to the business leaders, to maybe some people who you would know through your connections, right? Connections of connections, and building your personal brand there and trying to get an option there. So very much possible. I mean, in the current situation, obviously it's an unprecedented one. I would strongly recommend it, but in general also, whether it was a COVID or a non-COVID situation, I think we should look at those kind of options as well.
So I think in conclusion, for all the students watching this, please don't restrict yourself to college placecoms. If you don't believe you have the right opportunity there, or if you don't believe that there are companies that you're passionate about, please leverage LinkedIn. Like Atulaya said, build a personal brand, reach out to people to build connections and not just for job opportunities. Try to build your own personal network, and then see how you can acquire the opportunities that will make you passionate and keep you happy, instead of limiting yourself to only college placecom cells. Perfect. Now, Atulaya, any last piece of advice to people moving in the HR fraternity or people moving in the HR industry? Given that you are a veteran in the industry, I think it's very important for all future generations to learn from you and understand any message or advice that you have for them before they get into the space.
So thanks for calling me a veteran. I thought I have fairly not learned so much in HR yet. I think still have a
15 saal is veteran now.
And my advice or message to each and everyone who's listening to this today is not only the HR professionals, anybody who's listening to this is specifically for HR, be proud to be part of HR. I think a lot of us don't take that pride. A lot of us have that skepticism somewhere in our minds that, hey, what I'm doing, is it really adding value or not? Whatever you're doing is adding a lot of value. And it's a very, very critical function that we are part of. If we don't get it right, we can have very serious implications in the company. So I think each and everyone who is there, who is the HR person, should feel proud of being in HR. And it's a magnificent function. I've spent 15 years, personally enjoyed it a lot, and have been a strong advocate of sharing this through my channel also, like you just mentioned. And just that.
Thank you so much for taking the time out, Atulaya. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure interacting with you, Nikhar. Thank you so much.